DeviantArt is an art sharing platform where people can both post and view art. It's home to many talented artists, but as we all know, has its fair share of art tracers, and a lot more, to say the least. One user that we will be talking about has dabbled their fair share of everything just mentioned, and has even been doing this kinds of stuff since the end of 2025. 64bros. Cool. In order to explain the story properly, we'll need to start from the beginning, back in 25. While scrolling through DeviantArt one day, that nameless one, a friend of JakePlayz, aka LtzFlamez, aka a victim of who we'll just call 64 as short, noticed something familiar among the tens of artwork on his homepage. He had saw an old sketch art that his friend LtzFlamez had made were colored in. Curious, he clicked on it to see if his friend had joined DeviantArt, as he was only posting his art to YouTube and Twitter. Sure enough, it wasn't him. Just someone who lazily colored it in, aka 64, and claimed in the description that it was drawn by them at 3 a.m. Upset at this, Nameless leaves a comment saying something along the lines of, "Oh wow, didn't expect to see my friend's art here," and then went to the group chat to go let Flim know about it. Sure enough, Flim was just as clueless and just as upset as Nameless was. Furious, Flim went to Twitter to post about it, making a joke like, "Wow, my art was stolen for the first time. Guess I made it as an artist, huh?" But a recolor of Flim's old art was just the beginning of what was worse to come. From making someone quit drawing to making someone need therapy. This person is one of the worst human beings I've ever seen on this site. But let's talk about something else before we get too far into all that, shall we? So aside from Flim's art being uploaded on this guy's account without knowledge, a few of his friends' art was also the victim of this monster. Its Kaz, also known as Kaz, was probably taken on YouTube, and the previously mentioned LtzFlamez, as well as a not so related to Kaz, but fairly popular animator, FloJo Cartoon's art was also traced by 64. A lot of it too. And quick side note here, but FloJo Cartoons is the animator for a web series Joe made called Roommates. 64 is way too obsessed with this animator and his show, having traced Joe's art the most, and only seeming to draw creepy and disgusting werewolf versions of Joe's characters. And worse, sometimes even the characters of real people. At least the roommates are fictional characters, but drawing Joe as a werewolf where he ate someone, well, I feel bad for Joseph to say the least. Now, stepping aside from that and going back to Flim real quick. Flim has called out 64 several times in the past, all of which his videos are still up. Calling out 64 for tracing people's art and making people aware of them never did anything, however, as they kept tracing after the fact. In fact, Flim had made some roommates fan art that he used as a speed draw in one of his call-out videos, where it had the roommates saying no to art tracers and AI art. Immediately after posting the video and posting the art to Twitter, 64 had uploaded it to their DeviantArt, but lazily blacked out the bottom text that said art tracers and AI art, and had lazily scribbled no to people who steal my art. So off the bat, two things wrong with that. One, the art is stolen art, and two, no one is stealing your art. None of your traced art, let alone actual art that you didn't trace, was getting any likes. In fact, you are the art stealer here. So after getting called out by enough people and having dealt with all this drama too much, 64 ends up deleting all of the traced arts, which I should mention. They only moved to their scraps folder beforehand instead of actually deleting. Keep in mind though that they never deleted any of FloJo's traced art, just Nameless and his friends. For liking FloJo and his animations as much as they do, you'd think that they wouldn't trace his art? I mean, what if I went up to you and said, "I like your content so much that I traced your art and claimed it as my own"? So after the other traced art was removed, FloJo's aside, 64 asked Flame to ask if Flim could ever forgive them. According to Flames himself, as a lot of the information here is from me asking people for information as well as my own personal experience with this guy, Flim never wanted to apologize. Flames was the one trying to be nice because at the time, he didn't fully hate 64 yet, and thought that they genuinely changed, so he asked Flim to be nice. Flim, trying to be nice, ended up drawing a comic that lazily used old assets from an animation he did and had Flim send it to 64, as Flim doesn't use DeviantArt. Shortly after, the comic art that Flim had made, trying to be nice, was lazily colored and uploaded by 64 to their DeviantArt. Sure, They credited Flim as the original artist that time, but you don't just edit someone else's art without their permission, even if you credit them. It's wrong to tamper with people's art. And now, this is when we get into Flim quitting drawing art. That was the last straw. 64 had rage-baited and angered Flim one too many times, and that was it. They won. 64, who had been tracing people's art without care for anyone's feelings but themselves, had finally won. Flim gave up and stopped drawing. If he stopped drawing, then there'd be no more art of his for 64 to trace, right? In fact, Flim, during all this, was scared to post. He was scared to post any of his roommates' fan art in fears of it getting traced by 64. And for those who don't know how DeviantArt works, well, basically you can only report someone's art for being traced if it's your own art. And you provide a DeviantArt link, linking it back to your original deviation. Flim not using DeviantArt had no way to get his art removed. Moving back to Flamez, however, speaking of reporting art, Flamez, at the time of finding out his art was being traced, ended up reporting his art. He waited over a week and nothing happened. The traced art was still up. Flamez even mentioned all this in a video he made, where he tried to prove a point to 64. Flamez actually took the time for a video to learn how to draw in his friend Flim's art style, just to prove to 64 that they could just draw their own art in Flim's style instead of just tracing it, and that it wasn't that hard. It's a really good video, and I recommend you check it out after this. Link down below. So while I was talking with Flamez, who, since I've never mentioned this yet, I became friends with shortly after appearing on Kaz's Three Mates and a podcast while talking with them. He said that he's never publicly brought this up, as it's usually confidential between you and who you're talking to, and that he just never had anywhere to properly mention it. But shortly after all of his and his friend's art was removed from the account of 64, they ended up having to go to therapy from all this. See, much like myself, Flamez is neurodivergent and handles his emotions differently than a neurotypical. From 64's behavior with trying to troll Flamez and his friends for what they did to 64, despite them doing nothing wrong and 64 being in the wrong here, to 64 harassing his friends and him non-stop. The stress of it all was just too much for Flamez to handle, and even still, 64 still never cared. Flamez even missed the deadline of one of his web series episodes and had to release his April Fool's episode on April 1st, when a whole other episode was supposed to release before it. But Flamez hardly ever felt up to animating with what's been going on with the 64 situation. So eventually, both Nameless and Flamez end up blocking 64 and move on. All their traced art is gone. This guy said that they'd stopped tracing art, and while there was still Joe's art traced on there, it wasn't their art and they couldn't do anything, so they blocked and moved on. So 64 has said that they'd stopped tracing art, so they'll stop then, right? Even though they said it before and still traced Flamez's old art that they even lied about, claiming that it was only inspired by Flamez's art, but was a clear trace. Wrong. They continued to trace art, and even lie to me about it. So now we're out of 25 and into 26. My friend Felicity started using her sister's DeviantArt account, Tiny Drawings on Paper, to send fan art to 64 of their characters, just to be nice and try to get them to stop being a horrible person, which Felicity's sister had told her not to, as she was already fed up with 64 for tracing Sedna, Galaxy's art and not taking it down even after being called out by Sedna herself. But Felicity was just trying to be nice, which she learns is all for nothing soon after. 64 ends up uploading this art to their DeviantArt. Looks fairly normal, right? Well, if you look closely, it looks as if they took someone's roommate's fan art and drew werewolf aspects on it. You can tell with how only the werewolf bits are that thin brush, and the characters themselves are a pencil-like brush. So when we told them about this, they defended themselves and said that it was just their art style, when they've never drawn this way before, and the way the characters look doesn't look like how they normally draw them. And to make them look more fishy and guilty, they uploaded some art shortly after that. Says, "Please respect artists and don't trace their art." They even uploaded a literature piece that explained how you could tell if art was traced or not, seemingly as if trying to hide that they traced the art and wanted to look less guilty, which didn't work. And moving away from just tracing art and lying about it real quick, 64 has also been known to harass people too. They had made art of my character apparently making Kool-Aid with one of theirs, as the title says. But zooming in, they lied again because it's clearly their character hurting mine, and not to mention, where's the Kool-Aid then? I neurodivergent, not stupid. They've also drawn art in the past of Flim being injured, all because of what 64 did to them. And also drew art of Flim wondering why people keep tracing his art, when it's only been 64 that's been tracing his art. So after me and Felicity not wanting anything more to do with 64, and Felicity finally realizing that this guy is a lost cause and cares about no one but themselves, weeded up not watching them anymore and not being friends with them anymore. I mean, still having traced art on their account, them bullying us, and not to mention that this edit here that was originally made by Flames, not them. They are claiming that they made it when clearly they didn't, and they said that it's their character when it's just Dan from Flojo's roommates, but with a halo. Not to mention that the art used in this PFP edit was originally drawn by the show's title card artist, soda__095 on Twitter. Even other people have tried to call this guy out, including an old classmate of mine from my old school, 67broscool, Drew, who originally made his account to make fun of 64 and make quote-unquote art in their art style to poke fun at them. And someone by the user of Anonymous Commenting, who, Anonymous Commenting, had apparently messaged every DeviantArt account that was following/watching 64, letting them know about the traced art. And the guy went from having 114 watchers to down to just 100. And Anonymous Commenting did all this, took an hour or so out of his day. Not only to teach 64 a lesson and warn others of him and spread the word, but also because beforehand, 64 had blocked a friend of his. All because he asked nicely if 64 could remove some art that was traced off of his old art he made. So, hey, I'm trying to be nice about this, but could you remove this art, please? It's an old art I made that I posted to Pinterest a bit ago, and I never gave you permission to do this. Yeah, sorry, but, get blocked for being nice, idiot. Like, who does that? And 64 even lied about deleting the guy's comment and blocking them too. So nowadays, if you go to their account, you'll see that all the old traced art was edited and they replaced all the traced art with their own art, but there's still all these traced art on their account still. And not to mention that the PFP edit one is just a lazy crop of the original, and they didn't even bother to change that one. And so all of that, although messily talked about, as I did say that I'm not good with these types of videos and I tried my best, all of that leaves us up to today. Much drama was caused. Many of their friends left them after finding out the truth. This guy still deletes comments on their account whenever they try to call them out. All because of 64broscool, one of the worst people I've ever met here.